turmoil at Harvard has been a lead story in the nation's headlines since the October 7th attack of Hamas against Israel. The story built to an early peak with the unprecedented abrupt resignation of Harvard's brand new president, Claudine Gay. And the turmoil continues. According to the student newspaper, the Harvard Crimson, just days ago, more than 1,000 students walked out of Harvard's graduation ceremony in protest of the decision of Harvard Corporation, which runs the school, to bar 13 students because of their actions in protest of the Israel-Hamas war. If we take Harvard as a single case study in the analysis of what is happening on campuses around the nation, why did Harvard erupt in protests? Are Harvard's courses themselves the fertile ground on which those protests grow? My guest today, Harry Lewis, knows Harvard from the inside out. He's been on the faculty and a key leader of the administration for 50 years. And this January, he wrote an opinion piece in the Crimson calling for major changes in what courses are taught and how faculty are selected. And he's called for a review of the effectiveness of Harvard's program for diversity, equity, and inclusion, DEI. Young people I talk to say that objections to Harvard's policy of DEI and the DEI policies around the nation come from white men who are old fogies who just want their comfortable system back, and that DEI just means to include the most recent scholarship, such as that of Ibrahim X. Kendi, on racism and anti-racism. DEI, they say, is not intended to exclude or slant the entire curriculum. That sounds to me like an honest dispute that deserves honest responses. So let's talk to Harry Lewis and get his perspective. Harry Lewis, welcome to the Political Conversation.
Thank you for having me.
Let me just open the door for you. What led you to have concerns about the curriculum at Harvard?
I think there was a lot of attention on the activities of the student body, and Harvard's a complicated place. I always say there's not one Harvard. There's 10 or 100 Harvard, depending on where you are, whether you're an undergraduate, whether you're in the divinity school, whether you're in the business school. It's like being in 3 different places, and and if you're in the college, being on the football team is a very different experience from working in the library as a bookshelfer or whatever. So I always caution against generalizations about Harvard as a whole. That said, the attention that was attracted to Harvard after October 7th was focused on the activities of the students and of the students to whom you referred, who collection of student groups put out a statement blaming Israel for everything that happened on October 7th. And then the reaction of the university leadership, and that eventually resulted in congressional testimony and so on. And I thought that was fair in some ways, except that the one group of people who never got blamed for anything in any of this was the faculty. And that follows a pattern that I've observed in the past, that the Harvard, particularly the faculty themselves, of course, when they're assigning responsibility and blame, tend to leave themselves out of the picture. So I was generally aware of this notion, which I talk about in my op-ed, that the campus has become, in some ways, polarized, and I was aware that the vocabulary of classifying everyone as either an oppressor, to say, in one context, the old white guys like you and me, or the oppressed, was laced through the curriculum in certain parts of the academy. Obviously, not in others. There's no such vocabulary thrown around in the engineering school, which is where I sit. I'm a computer science professor. So I just decided to do the simple experiment of sitting down at the course catalog and typing a few volatile words into the search window and see how frequently they come up. And it confirmed that there's in certain parts of the curriculum there's a lot of talk about dividing the world into the oppressors and the oppressed, and I became concerned about that, and I just decided I would try to write something that might connect this to the actions, the extreme not actions and the words of the student groups that put out that statement, that they were in some ways perhaps taking off from a platform that we had been teaching them was a legitimate platform from which to stand.
Well, let's pause for a second and take a little bit of a detour from curriculum specifically, and talk about your proposal that Harvard begin to review the effectiveness of its diversity, equity, inclusive programs, which it seems to me is very much tied up in what you're discussing, but it's not curriculum itself. Can you walk us through the origin of Harvard's DEI efforts?
Yes, the word diversity, which has become spoken of as a core value of the university itself, really owes its exalted status to Justice Powell's opinion in the original Supreme Court affirmative action case, in which Harvard was not a defendant in 78 or 77, but was cited as a model of the right way to take diversity into account. That was a very contentious Supreme Court decision, which affirmed affirmative action in college admissions with some restrictions on how it would be done, no quotas and so on. But there were I think there were 4 opinions, maybe more than 4. And Justice Powell's was the Supreme Court's, that was the court's decision, and a majority joined parts of Justice Powell's decision in one way or another. But anyway, the point is that that's the decision where Justice Powell said, look, the one defensible rationale for affirmative action in college admissions is the educational value of a diverse student body. And that is a compelling state interest, he wrote in 1978. And not, the whole court did not agree with that, but it had enough support that it became the law of the land, and subsequent challenges reaffirmed that, and Harvard followed that policy in its own practices, as it had been praised for doing in that original, decision. So but it became a lot hung on that word over the years, and there developed whole bureaucracies of diversity officers for not just for not relating to admissions, which was just in the hands of the admissions office, but relating to other areas of campus life and of hiring practices and so on and so forth. So it's gotten rather top heavy, the diversity apparatus at Harvard, as I think it has elsewhere, but I'm not an expert on other institutions, so I'm really not going to comment on that. But I think Harvard has set a standard that others have followed in this, or Harvard, in any case, it's kind of a national phenomenon, I believe. So when the Supreme Court, in its most recent affirmative action decision, changed its mind, which did not seem to me an unreasonable thing to do after 50 years of, affirming a practice which had a fairly narrow rationale for legality. It seemed to me that the right thing to do at that point was for Harvard to say, we've always followed the law. The law has changed. We'll follow it now. But, we've built a lot of other structures and practices and policies and bureaucracies on the basis of this concept of the educational value of diversity. And the country is a different place. The law is in a different place. And, this is an appropriate time to back up and remember that diversity was never an end in itself. It was always in service of educational excellence and then excellence in other areas. And this would be an appropriate time, since we have to change our practices anyway, to see whether those structures and practices that have been built up over the years are actually serving the purposes for which they were designed and implemented. I would have hoped that that was the position Harvard took. It was not. Harvard rather, the president put out a rather grumpy initial statement about the Supreme Court decision, and grumpy, if not defiant. I still think it's a reasonable thing to do. And it's not that we don't value having a diverse student body, but, when the Supreme Court says the way you've been achieving it is no longer permissible and gives its reasons why that is, we kind of have to look at how we've, everything we've developed that started off from that base.
Well, correct me if I'm wrong, and I easily could be wrong on this. My recollection, poking into the history of this, is that DEI began at Harvard under the administration of Drew Gilpin Faust, and was led by one of your colleagues, Danielle Allen. Allen has taken a different perspective from that, and has urged what she calls a return to the initial objectives of the DEI efforts. So the way she characterizes it is that the initial effort was to take advantage of every possible perspective and to bring that into the life of the community, and argues pretty obviously then that has all kinds of benefits educationally. Her argument then gets a sharp edge, and is that over the course of time, and for a variety of reasons, DEI changed from being essentially all-inclusive to focusing on correcting the errors of and the problems with marginalized groups, Black Americans, Hispanic Americans. And so she urges a return to that. I haven't thought about the intersection of Allen's proposal to return to what she calls the original direction and the Supreme Court case. Have you thought about that issue?
Well, uh, you know, I think that the issue of college admissions in the Supreme Court case is kind of settled. I mean, maybe not. We'll see how it plays. But I think I just want to put a thumbs up to Danielle's call for a return to what the whole DEI initiative was supposed to be focused on. And in particular, and I don't want to speak for her or claim that I, absorbed what we had to say on this as well as you have. Your summary sounds fair to me, but I have recently. But she does make the point that it has, as implemented and bureaucratized, that it has gotten it's assumed some really sharp edges. In the I'm one of the founders and one of the co-presidents right now of the Council on Academic Freedom at Harvard, which is a faculty group that started a year or so ago. And it started in response to some concerns, but a few particular cases. And one of the particular cases was the case of a junior faculty member who was really, bullied out of her position for saying for teaching in a biology or anthropology course, I forget which, that there were two sexes, and that, she was not denying that gender identity was something different from biological sex, and it was just, she was accused of being transphobic, which she is not. You didn't list that among the categories that this concept has been extended to apply to. And so and accused in particular by, the diversity, one of the diversity officers or agents in her department. And she got no support from the leadership. And so, there's something wrong in an academic setting where something like that can be labeled not inclusive, and therefore, running afoul of the mandates and principles of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I just want to, I'm connect this to your paraphrase of Danielle Allen's for a call for a, return to, what diversity was supposed to be, and diversity, equity, inclusion, what that was all supposed to be accomplishing. It was not supposed to be there in order to hound academics out of their position for allegedly, being transphobic on the basis of, what they had to say about biological sex. So this is the sort of thing where, I think Danielle is right, and I think we're in sympathy with each other in our view that this, although I'm not saying we're saying exactly the same thing by any means, but that some of what's been done in the name of diversity, equity, and inclusion has gone too far. And I don't claim to have a precise analysis of exactly what's right and what's wrong about it, but I think it's time for a sober look.
This is, interestingly enough, this is far from the first time you've, how do I phrase this, publicly dealt with Harvard's curriculum issues. There was one period that I read about that interested me, in which you urged Harvard to, you were concerned that Harvard's curriculum and that Harvard's student body was obsessed with basically just personal ambition, moving ahead as fast as they can. The typical vision was graduating from Harvard, snagging a great job with a consulting or financial model company, and making a rapid personal fortune, and that the moral compass of the campus had eroded, and the curriculum that was presented to students had eroded in its delivery of some sense of what the good life, the well-lived life, the morally lived life could be. And now you're engaged in discussing the curriculum, and it sounds, correct me please if I'm just overstating or just off on the wrong tangent here, your concern is that a moral perspective has become smothering at Harvard. It's an odd shift in the direction that you are concerned with. Am I misperceiving that?
Well, I certainly wouldn't have thought to put it that way. I don't think of the DEI policing as moral. I guess that's why I don't I you know I try to I do think the polarization that's fashionable in American politics these days is has provided a bit of a model and a pretext for some of the overreaction, using the scolding people for using the wrong pronoun or whatever, is if nothing else, it exhibits a lack of humility and generosity of spirit. So I suppose there is a kind of puritanical, there's an odd word to use in this regard, but there is a kind of puritanical or Calvinist sternness with which we're now making judgments about each other on the basis of turns of language, which is completely unfair. But I think there's actually more of a consistency with the things that I wrote about 15 or 20 years ago in my book, Excellence Without a. It's the name of the book that I wrote at that time, where I talked about the failings of the modern Harvard, which have not gotten any better, in my opinion. And there, what I was really more focused on, and I do think it's quite relevant to the current context, was the lack of civic responsibility in the way our curriculum and our educational programs, particularly for undergraduates, that's mostly where my attention has always been focused, has been executed and carried out. And I think there's I proceed from a basis that we're tax exempt institutions for a particular reason, which is that we're supposed to serve the public good, and part of the public good involves preparing our students to be good citizens, and that has a particular meaning in the United States. And that there's not, it's hard to find that thread in our in our programs and our curriculum and in the sorts of things that our leaders tend to talk about. And the variety of reasons why this has happened over the years. Partly it's frankly the fact that the faculty have become more specialized. The way you get ahead is by becoming expert in your particular sub discipline, and there's not much reward in the academic setting for being a sort of preaching the values of civic virtue and that those sorts of generally good things that want our institutions to support in this country, or even just the notion of trying to instill in students that before anything else, purpose of the university is to preserve civilization, and we're supposed to create new inventions and bring the university and help the world towards a better future. But at a minimum, we're supposed to make sure that civilization survives. And here I'm just gonna give you a little paraphrase of the thesis of that earlier work, because I do think it's quite relevant today as we're under intense pressure from Congress for reasons which I don't think are entirely unreasonable, although certainly many of the attacks on us are politically motivated. But I mean, Harvard is just a wonderful target, and it always has been. But I am a baby boomer. I was literally born, a year or so after my father returned from the European theater. I am the exact definition of a boomer. And by the time I came to Harvard as an undergraduate in the 1960s, there was still a survival in the general education curriculum of the notion that one of the purposes of the university was to make sure that nothing like what had happened during World War II, or had almost happened during World War II, the complete destruction of civilization, could happen again. And Harvard, after the war, had developed a curriculum, called General Education in a Free Society, which was framed around the idea that, freedom and civilization were things for the university to be devoted to preserving and advancing. And, that sort of drifted away in the 70s and was replaced with kind of other structures for our general education and our curricular structure, but it never was replaced with anything that really put the same kind of emphasis on what I'll just call, civic virtues. And now we've come to the point, and now I'm going to finally connect all of that, 50-year-old history or 75-year-old with the present day. So when Congress calls us in, they have a legitimate reason. They don't have a legitimate reason for the over subpoenas that they're issuing on, every email that the president and the, members of the governing boards ever wrote to each other, or whatever it is. But they do have a legitimate reason for asking, on what basis are you claiming that you are serving the public good? And note that, some of the prime antagonists in those congressional hearings are Twits. Actually, at least one of them was. So that's not a completely unreasonable question, because I think if you asked the students that are graduating today that question, they would have a hard time answering it. And I think, a few decades ago that actually would not have been the case. I think, would have been able to say, had this thing, free societies and their importance and their values, and it was complicated, it wasn't simple, it wasn't indoctrination, but people kept talking about these things and not what we now talk about.
Earlier, you were startled by my use of the term morality to describe the DEI efforts, but everything you just said, I found myself thinking back. Here's the train of thought that you sparked in me, and you can see how this parallels what you were saying, but as a different slant. The curriculum that Harvard, let's just sort of say, drifted into, because it wasn't a single reform effort, it was a hodgepodge, piece by piece sort of drift in the 80s and the 90s and the aughts, was a curriculum in which students simply couldn't find a moral thread. It was adrift. The ground was barren, and into that void came people with a very strong moral code. So when I hear arguments made from the left on the importance of DEI, I hear preachers. I hear people with a very firm belief system, a profound belief system, and a system that supports itself. It is a true system. So here I am, a young Harvard student, entering for the first time, graduated from high school, got good grades. I don't have the clue what I'm going to do in life. And I end up at Harvard, and I hear two voices. One is, get ahead, take a bunch of courses, but there's no real moral grounding. And then a couple of my buddies have this very different perspective. It's a highly moral, highly altruistic perspective. And that can be very attractive. So I look at it, and I'm asking myself, that barren ground became fertile soil for much of what happened.
I think that's a fair assessment. I would not underestimate the cynicism of Harvard students. They're not easily, and as soon as a critical mass movement starts to move towards any extremum, there is a natural, skepticism and students start ignoring it. So I'm not quite as I can't buy in, the mass movement image of how the student body is becoming fanaticized. That doesn't feel right to me. As I say, there are pockets of Harvard where I believe that happens. I mean, my op-ed, tried to talk about this a little bit, but it kind of couldn't go far enough in 800 words. I think there's I think we've created fertile ground for, I'm not going to use, no, let's not use the fertile ground metaphor. I think we've created dry tinder for an inflammation of passion on addressing some particular injustices in a particular part of the world, and we've helped with that in our curriculum and with some of the politicization that has happened on campus. And under those circumstances, it doesn't take many people playing with matches to create an influence. And so I think what's being reported about the incendiary nature of some of what's been particularly anti-Semitic, but also Islamophobic incidents, is true, but I think it's actually, limited, and it's often ignited by small numbers of people. It doesn't really, it's not like the whole student body or anything is thing. I mean, my own campus is in the engineering campus, which is on the other side of the river from Harvard Square. And, if I didn't read the paper, would not know about the incidents that are occurring, because we're just completely unaware of it. There's no press value in running a protest here, because the sound trucks and cameras won't come to Alston. So it's not a daily fact of life on parts of the campus where the TV trucks don't know the address.
So listening to you now, I've had a thought that I wanted to test with you. You were talking about the consistency of your recommendations about Harvard's curriculum, and then I'm thinking about how some of the reactions to what you have said have been. I gather. Let me put words in your mouth and then tell me to go away. Nothing in what you have proposed is what I would call a detailed curriculum reform. You don't have 10 points to make. You don't go department by department. You're continually talking about the importance of faculty making decisions about what steps will be taken next. And I come away from that thinking that your discussion of the role of the faculty is not peripheral. It's central to what you're talking about. And here's one of my let me juxtapose this with one of my great fears. You talked a moment ago about congressional oversight of Harvard's governance. And the reason why that can be justified. But there are some big buts there. When the state starts reaching out and doing things of that nature, not only is there a temptation for folks to grandstand like crazy, but it could go to the next step, which could really be brutal. We fought wars to prevent that kind of state interference happening in our society. And it'd be horrible to see it happen again. So what I hear you saying is, before they start meddling with us, we need to step up to the challenge of reforming what we are doing. And I am not here as a prophet saying, here's the direction, get in marching order, blah, blah, blah. But it's crucially important that the faculty as a body begin to think about these questions. You called for an assessment of DEI's success or failure, not a denunciation of this or that. Am I completely off beam?
No, you've hit two very important things, which I'm really glad you've given me the opportunity to stress. So what's happened over the years is that as I've been on the faculty now for 50 years, so I've watched this happen, and I've been in various roles within the university administration, and I've sat on committees on everything from appointing the next professor of what's it to selecting the next football coach. I've done it all. Okay. The faculty are less engaged in university governance now than they have been at any point in my 50 years on the faculty.
Wow.
They are less engaged. The existing structures for which the faculty, by which faculty have input, are pretty weak. And for the most part, the faculty like it that way because they have been, as I said, hired and promoted on the basis of their
very
research and
specialized, yeah.
teaching, but but it tends to be because they're, the best specialists in this area or that. And at the same time, as the faculty have become more specialized and thereby more disengaged, an enormous bureaucratic apparatus has arisen, not just in the diversity, equity, and inclusion, but in all areas. I kind of hate to use this term, but it's actually accurate. I think there is an administrative deep state that is running the place, and it's not the faculty anymore. And and many of the people, they're my friends and relatives. Some of them, they're extraordinarily gifted and talented people, and they're performing essential roles, and they're performing essential roles that the faculty don't want to perform. And they're performing essential roles in an environment that is extremely litigious now, so that, you can't actually have faculty amateurs, making certain kinds of decisions because you'll get sued over them. Do we need a wheelchair ramp here? That's not a decision that a faculty member should be making unless they happen to be an expert in that, which they're not. So, there's all kinds of reasons why, it's important to have a competent administration, but it is so much larger than it used to be, and it has taken so many decisions, out of the hands of faculty that the faculty are not running the place in the way that they once did. They're not making the important decisions as they used to. So that's one piece of it. The other piece of it is that, and this is much of what we've been talking about, I think, would be equally true at any comparable institution. But the Harvard has a particular problem with its governance structure. There is Harvard is the official governing board of the university, called the Harvard Corporation, consists of I think it's 12 plus the president, individuals, most of them not academics, which is fine. That's not a problem. I just mention it. And then there's a secondary governing board called the Board of Overseers, which is elected by the alumni. The corporation is self-perpetuating. And I've been calling attention to the weakness of that particular governance structure, and it's the lack of effective interface with the academic program and the activities of the faculty. For many years, I had an op-ed in the Boston Globe, I think back in almost 20 years ago now, where I described the government structure as ineffective, and I think recent events have not suggested that it's any more effective now than it than it has been in the past. So that's another piece of the reform. What seems to me, the reason for bringing it up in this particular context is that you would think it would be one of the functions of a body called the Board of Overseers, to provide oversight of some of the drifting that we've been discussing in the way the academy is run. And do the governing boards think the faculty are doing fine? We certainly don't want them going in there and, picking individual faculty, and we certainly don't want the government doing it either. You're absolutely right about that. But, one of the one of the reasons why I worry about the weakness of our governance structure is that the Board of Overseers and the corporation should be the agents to make sure that our faculty and academic programs, in fact, are supportive of the public good. That is to say, we should not be in a position where Claudine Gay gets raked over the coals by Congress, and it's not her fault. She just got on the job, but these are trends that have been developing for decades. And where was our oversight board while it was happening? And that's
Indeed.
why, I think the alumni are increasingly aware of this. I certainly don't endorse the alumni who, are declared that they're not going to donate to Harvard anymore. But I certainly do endorse the alumni who are trying to get themselves elected to the Board of Overseers against all odds, because Harvard makes it extremely difficult to do that, so that they can have some voice in these things that are of broad concern.
It's interesting hearing your description of the role of faculty. This is a very personal observation, but I was on the board of the Los Angeles Community College system, and faculty members at the local community colleges would have been appalled to hear that their influence over curriculum would deteriorate, and they really saw themselves as the keepers of the flame. And here we are talking about Harvard, that's having a difficult time reasserting that concern.
Well, the one part, my op-ed got a lot of praise from my colleagues and not very much criticism. And I wonder whether they read it all the way to the end, because it just seems to me fairly obvious. I don't know. Again, I'm relatively isolated from faculty, from the partisan politics of the Harvard faculty, because I'm in the engineering school and I have no idea, who's a Republican, who's a Democrat, and we don't, and our teaching doesn't, it's disconnected to those dimensions in American life. But over in the history department, sociology department, the divinity school, these are where the subject matter is much more contingent on the political state of the country. Everybody is much more conscious of this. And I gather, I don't think anybody disputes this, it's been published out there, that the Harvard faculty has become much more politically to the left than it used to be. And it's since those averages can over all Harvard faculty, and that includes the business school and the engineering school, which are probably a little more centrist than the other parts of Harvard. The other parts of Harvard are probably further left than the numbers even suggest. And I can understand how that happens. If you're in a social science department and you have a particular, uh, you know, viewpoint, and the and it gets tacitly, not explicitly, to be dominant among your faculty, and the faculty are the dominant voices in picking the next generation of faculty. Once the political tilt passes a tipping point, then it's likely to only become more exaggerated over time. That seems to me something like that has probably happened, and it was not by design or anything like that. But did nobody notice this? I mean, does it? Maybe it doesn't matter, but it does seem to me to matter if it affects the way we structure our curriculum and the values we articulate in terms of what the virtues of a well-educated person are going to be. So I think it probably does matter, and I think, as I say, this is where I wish the governing boards had a stronger oversight over the years, where we have drifted to the situation we're in, and we would have less to be answerable to the American public and to their elected representatives than we now do.
I literally had decided not to engage you on a topic, and what we have just been saying has changed my mind. So I hope this foray works. I think I've read a bunch of your stuff, and it's delightful, but we disagree on one thing. You actually, at one point at least, praised grade inflation, saying that yes, you get the idea. Say it's happened. It's always happened since the invention of grades, and I reacted strongly to that. Here's the thought, and deal with it as you would. I see a strong relationship between grade inflation, which at Harvard, what are the stats now? 80 to 90% of all grades handed out to undergraduates are A's. Am I correct in that? It's
Probably. No, I don't doubt it. I don't doubt it. I just say
yeah.
I don't know what the statistics are.
Let's just say it's a lot. Anyway, grade inflation seems to me to have some strong relationship to your description of an incoherent curriculum without a moral compass, and much of the same moment and much of the same motive. That motive being this: give the students what they want, not what they deserve. After all, who are we to say that we know what is important and what students should be learning? And out of that, I saw growing a lot of the highly moralistic. I go back to morality, the highly moralistic point of view, because there were folks who were perfectly willing to step up and provide a morality. But I find it hard to believe that grade inflation can take place at the same time that the school is saying to the students in every way, what's going on here is important. What you are learning is important. It seems to go hand in hand with a much more lackadaisical moral structure.
Well, I think we actually still disagree. I do say in the one piece at least that I wrote 20 years ago or whatever it was, inflation, I do say it can't go on forever. We are approaching the asymptote, as we would say in the applied mathematics business. But I continue to believe. First of all, I actually continue to believe that in spite of our worst efforts or best efforts, whatever we are doing on the faculty, that Harvard students actually graduate remarkably well educated because of who they were when they came in. So that's we're in a privileged position in that in that way, and I do find that they are extremely almost relieved when you tell them that, what we're going to talk about today is going to be maybe the most important thing you learn at Harvard, but you're not going to be tested on it. There's no way you got to believe me. You got to listen to me for what we're actually talking about, not because you're going to be tested on it, or you're going to get a B plus or an A minus or an A, depending on you can parrot it back to me at the end of the term. No, I don't. And I'm not going to let you get away with just sitting there and listen to it. We're going to sit there and have a discussion, and you're going to have to actually engage with me and your fellow students and my teaching assistants and so on to talk about this thing and its importance, and whether you think it's important or whether you think something else is more important. And stop looking for what the right answer is, because I don't know the right answer. But here are some competing values, and it's really important that we talk. And there's a kind of performative aspect to teaching, which I was always very good at, and I enjoyed doing it. I had theatrical, experience when I was in high school, and it was very valuable to me when I started being a lecturer. But I eventually realized, particularly after the internet took over in around the year 2000, that with all my lectures recorded and so on, no one was showing up for class because there was no reason to. They could watch my recorded lectures and get the same things as they were, as they would have gotten for showing up for class. And so for the last, kind of 20 years or so, I just stopped lecturing. I teach all my courses in discussion format, even mathematics classes. We do problem solving together in class and all the rest of that. And so I think that the trick to I don't think you can solve the problem of motivating students to really become educated by giving more C's. I mean, I just don't. It's probably, we probably should throw the whole grade scale out and start over at this point, because you're right. There's no information content, to use another term of my art, in the grade scale anymore. There's so, but it's not the important thing. The thing is reorienting the philosophy of education so that we are teaching stuff that actually is important to our students in the part of the curriculum where they're not doing their major. The historians can teach history as they want to do to their history students, but I want the computer science students to take history courses too. The reason why, and what I want the computer science students to get out of teaching, out of learning history, is something that's really important for their role in the survival of civilization. And so, we got to get that energy back about the faculty have to somehow get back the feeling that they're doing something really important. They're doing something really important. They're training the people who are going to be the leaders of society and the preservers of the sacred institutions on which free societies depend. And that's the part that I wish we could get, as I say, re-energized about. And I think the grading scale is a distraction.
Well, thank you for your frank observations. It's a shame that we disagree, because you're wrong. No. It's been a pleasure meeting you.
All right. Nice to talk to you too. Thank you so much for having me.
Great to talk to you. Thanks so much.